Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. This is season 4, and by now you ought to know where to find us. We are everywhere that you get your podcasts. Hit us up on Twitter at Duke FB. That's Foxtrot Bravo Coverage. Duke FB Coverage. Our DMs are open. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. And hey, guess what? If we're starting season 4, that means we got to talk about the upcoming football season. And who better to do that than our next guest? He's back for, I believe, his 4th appearance on the podcast, which may be a record. He has just finished up a mission trip at the UNC Law School in Chapel Hill, trying to convert some heathens to the side of truth, justice, the American way, and not whining and complaining about grant of rights, which we might talk about later. The more I research that, the more FSU fans just need to shut up. But anyway, we can talk more about that later. And our next guest is here in addition to talk about his 3-year stint in purgatory, mission trip, whatever you want to call it. He's going to preview the upcoming Duke football season with us. Lee Rodio, how are you, sir?
Ben, how we doing, boss man? It's good to be back with you.
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for making some time for us today, coming back on to talk. I'm going to give you a chance to bring us up to speed on what you've been doing. But first, I have to mention something that I forgot to mention before I got to the intro, which is I want to give a shout out to the podcaster poll for asking me to participate in its top 25 voting this year, which will be fun because I am not a diehard college football guy, and this will force me to watch more than just the ACC because there's more than 25. There's not 25 teams in the ACC yet. Again, we may talk about that later. So if you can, check out podcasterpoll.com, at podpoll on Twitter. I started listening to it recently. It's a very good podcast, so give it a listen. And I hope I don't ruin the poll votes for that. Highly likely. So with that being said, I brought everybody up to speed on what I've been doing, in addition to tweeting madly about the TV viewership, grant of rights, and other issues that we're looking at for expansion. That's what I've been doing lately when I've not been working. But Lee, why don't you tell us what you've been up to since you were last on the podcast? What have you been up to this last year?
Absolutely. Might be quicker to answer what I haven't been up to, but and also before I get to that, it's funny that you say get you to watch more college football. I feel like one of my main productivity issues is I can find myself getting into the most random, college football game that they can possibly throw up on ESPN. That's one of my it doesn't work the same way for the NFL. I'm a Steelers fan and have a hard time watching a game that's not, the Steelers or, some important playoff game. But man, my roommate and I we'd stay up till all hours watching, Montana and North Dakota State. And, just it's something, I don't know if it's the competitiveness or what, but it's just such I swear up and down that college football is, the pinnacle of the game. I have so much respect for what the guys in the league do, but as far as just the mechanics of it and the motivations behind the players and the teams and the difference in parity and the, undermanned teams overachieving. I wish I had your problem. I'll say that.
Well, hey, it'll be a lot easier because you're just going to have to check the Big Ten schedule.
Right, exactly.
In the next couple of years, and you'll just know which Big Ten division you want to watch.
I'm pretty sure I saw they've got like a couple Canadian Football League teams in there in the last crop, but I'm just waiting for them to start, inventing schools, just see if anybody notices. But yeah, I'm doing well. Don't think I would have said that if you'd asked me about a month ago. Just finished up preparation and execution of the bar exam. So made it through that. Graduated from the school down the road, concluded my time in missionary service. I don't know how many, souls I converted and wayward people that I saved, but it was certainly an interesting experience. I'll give it that. And in all seriousness, it's a phenomenal education. Great. Just an opportunity I could not have been more thankful to have been able to take part in. And I will say we, as of last year, we had as many, if not more, former Duke athletes at Carolina Law School than there were former Carolina athletes. So we're slowly taking over. It's taken us a little while, but we've got 4, counting me in last year's class. We had 4 former Duke athletes, and I think 2 administrators at the school that went to Duke. So we're branching out. We're making sure that, you know, the folks down the road don't stray too far.
I like this. It's like you're infiltrating it like a long game, and then you're gonna pull the rug out from under them, and it's too late.
Oh yeah,
and they're gonna end up in like some backwards conference, and then Duke's gonna go in to the Big Ten or whatever it's gonna be called then, and you know, UNC will be left holding the bag. I love it. I love it.
Well, I don't want to incriminate myself. I'm not saying I engaged in any of this, but they're one of the old famous stories about where the Carolina Law School building is. It actually directly overlooks the football practice field. And it's been years ago. It's, you know, I think it was early 90s. They actually had to call security because a few members of the ECU coaching staff had congregated in the law library and had tried to covertly set up cameras on the UNC practice field.
They could have paid you guys for that. I mean, that's such amateur hour stuff. I mean, law students are A, desperate for money, and B, spending a lot of money that they don't have through loans. I mean, that's just amateur hour.
I want so badly for that to have been a Steve Logan related story, because I just feel like that would fit in his aura. I mean, that just sounds like something to come out of that era of North Carolina college football. But man, is that not the most quintessential, you know, regional rivalry story?
Well, it'd be nice to see more of that, but okay, let's go straight into the expansion because we keep talking about it. You were at Duke for 4 years. Right. And I'm sure you had a friend or two who played an Olympic sport during that time.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about the difference between the football life that you were involved with and the Olympic sport life? Because that has been a common thread that has come up about how are you going to deal with these West Coast teams and the multiple time zones and the baseball and the swimming. Can you give us some insight and education on that?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, one thing I think that's particularly pertinent to this area is I've heard a lot of people and some local pundits talk about, you know, the potential effects that this would have on basketball schools. But I mean, even schools like Duke and Carolina, where basketball is the, you know, priority in the, you know, the athletics culture, not that we're not trying to change that over at Wallace Wade, but, you know, you got to call a spade a spade. You know, I mean, even at those sorts of schools, football still reigns supreme as far as the logistics and the money influx into the athletic department, because, you know, marshaling the resources to successfully execute a Division I football season, you know, would co-opt even the most robust and well-staffed athletic department as far as getting, you know, just the team from point A to point B, whether that's the hotel to the stadium before a home game, or, you know, to on the bus or on a plane to wherever the team's going for an away game. And that's not even mentioning the almost as many staffers that have to, you know, travel or you know, have input in that situation to make it happen. And, you know, you realize pretty quickly that the entirety of the athletic apparatus is really geared towards making sure football has what it needs. I mean, even in Duke's context, you know, not that we hadn't had football success over the past decade, but I mean, even, you know, growing up around Durham, it wasn't the best facilities, but football, I mean, for my lifetime at Duke has always had its own facilities, standalone weight room, training room. I mean, everything that you would need for any team, and it's just specifically devoted to football. And you multiply that by orders of magnitude for the giant Southern land grant schools, and the Big Ten mega enrollment places like Penn State and Ohio State. And I mean it is very clear that even in situations where the parity between the sports is negligible, football is the priority, and it just makes you feel so particularly sad and devastated and honestly angry for Olympic sports, because I mean, in any football situation at the college level, it's not that hard to get football players to not have classes scheduled on Fridays. You get a whole day to travel, you get at least one night to get settled, and no matter when your game is on Saturday, you're back on Sunday and presumably have time to recover. And that's just not the case for Olympic sports. And one of the things that'll be interesting to see is, people talk about, the joke is, when this is all well and good for football realignment, but how about when the Penn State volleyball team is playing on Tuesday night in Pasadena and expected to be at class on Wednesday morning? I would even go further to say non-revenue sports around the country were already struggling to be able to afford charter flights at all, let alone to the extent that'll be necessary for these giant cross-country regular trips. And I think it's going to get to the point, unless NIL has so shifted the financial balance of power in college sports, that even some of the best non-revenue sports that are out there. The Duke golf, the UNC women field hockey, the NC State track and field, these highly regarded sport. NC State wrestling is another one. It's like these highly regarded sports that in the most regionalized contexts, we're having trouble finding the logistics and the finances to get from A to B. I don't know how it's going to be possible on that end, let alone feasible for the health and well-being of the athlete, because they had already been not even trying at the NCAA level to claim that the well-being of the athlete had any effect on their decision making, and now it's
total lie.
Exactly, it couldn't be more apparent. So I think that is one of the things that's going to drive. It'll either drive the regionalization of these giant conferences. It's sort of how I think it was Coach K that put it forward, back when the ACC was contemplating, it was like Texas and somebody back in the 90s, early 2000s. And people were talking about how the logistics would work. And you have to regionalize, or you have to split football from the rest of the athletic department. And I don't think either one will be particularly catastrophic, because I'm not one to jump on the doomsday bandwagon. College sports is such a large undertaking and it's so popular and it's in such high demand that it's going to work itself out. But my concern is, how many student athletes are they going to sacrifice on the altar of the almighty dollar in the process of getting to where we reach a sustainable situation? And I'll wrap that up by saying, the Duke athletics, I feel, has always tried to make sure that our athletes are taken care of no matter what the sport is. But even within Duke athletics, you see room to improve. Not only makes you wonder at places that, either because of the size of their athletic department and having to spread the wealth and account for so many student athletes, or at places that don't have the financial resources that Duke does, if Duke athletics struggles to pull this off in any way, adjacent to something that could be called successful, you have to wonder how much people are going to suffer at places that aren't fortunate to have the circumstances that we did.
Well, and that's a couple of things that I want to point out. And I try not to dominate the conversations too much because I like to hear what you guys have to say. But there's a couple of things I want to point out. One, you talked about spreading the wealth around. I know people are saying the ACC is not making enough from the TV deal with ESPN. I get that. But I don't know how it is you can't feed a family on somewhere between $30 and $40 million solely from TV money. You have other sources of income.
Won't somebody think of the children?
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it. And it's odd to me. It seems like somewhere in there you have $30 to $40 million just of TV money. You could find a way to feed a family. All right. And then your point about what's happening with the Olympic sports, Stanford and Cal are the embodiment of excellent Olympic sports. I mean, the U.S. women's national soccer team, they have a feeder from Stanford basically. But for terrible coaching this year in the Women's World Cup, the U.S. team is still playing. Right. So, and it's just, hey, sorry, tough. Your football team, Stanford's been down, even though your viewership, and we can talk about this as well, even though your viewership for football is better than a lot of the ACC teams. Sorry, you're just going to be left holding the bag, and you're going to have to get relegated like you're a soccer team in Europe.
Yep.
I don't know.
It's so sad. It's just so sad. And like, there were a couple of tweets over the weekend from like, I think there's one from like Oregon softball player, Stanford soccer player, and just sort of, bearing their vulnerability. And, I picked this, this or that school because, proximity to family or financial situation or whatever. And I mean, it's stressful enough for the people for whom they made the decision. I mean, this isn't exactly easy for the football teams. And then it's innumerably more unconducive to the people who weren't even in the consideration when these decisions were made. And it just goes to show you, no matter how many, I don't discount the value of having good people in good places. And I think, human connection and loyalty, and I mean, that's all important and well and good and can make a lot of difference in localized contexts. But the system's just gotten so big that, I mean, it would be hard for a well-intentioned coach or administrator to stem the tide or do whatever they felt they needed to do to put the athlete first, even if that was what they set out to do.
Well, and if they want to do that, and the OG podcast has done a lot of discussion about this that I would commend everybody to listen to, is every move the NCAA makes is a business move, right? Okay. Letting a good conference of champions die, for example. Okay. Letting Texas and SEC leave the Big 12. Okay. Why not, to alleviate the burden on the Olympic sports teams, just say, okay, well, you're going to go and do a road trip through 3 or 4 different teams. You're going to play them all there. We're going to set up classes for you to be remote. You can take them at the facility that you're going to be visiting, and we're going to make that available to you. Because I think, for example, if you're trying to just have like a relationship, if you're trying to have a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, how are you going to do that and meet the demands of having to go across the country constantly? I mean, how is that going to work?
Yep, exactly. Yep. And the only other solution, I think, and I've heard this floated by a couple people, is, and I know universities try to do this on their own sometimes, just to like, get fan engagement. You schedule a volleyball game or a soccer game, a little bit after or before a football game, so people can try to go to both. I think you'll probably see at least a few schools try to do it's like, in middle school where they schedule the soccer team, the football team, and to be in the same, play the same opponent so you can use the same bus kind of thing. I mean, I think you'll see some of that. It's just, I think I have no doubt it'll work itself out, but I think we're in that period of, everyone running around with the hair on fire, because we're in no man's land as far as a, playbook for how to tackle this kind of thing.
Correct. And I do want to get your thoughts on if we add teams. What we're talking about, at least as of the time that we started recording this, which is in the evening of August 9, 2023, is the discussion is about Cal, Stanford, and SMU. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. And I just want to say a couple of things on it first, which is people who are saying, oh, just let FSU and Clemson leave and we can add these other teams. Stop. That's nonsense. Those are by far the two biggest brands for football, which drives to your point, Lee, earlier. This is monetary, drives the money. By far the biggest brands, cannot be replaced. We'd lose too much money from that, and there would be no ACC. That would just be the death knell of the ACC. And if you look at Cal and Stanford, those are better TV properties than a lot of the current teams that we have, based on what I was able to find about TV viewership numbers. It's not great, but it's right up there with NC State, North Carolina. Stanford's a little bit below UNC, but it's better than a lot of teams. SMU's way down on the list, but it does give us a recruiting foothold in Texas. And we get all those teams. We have the Atlantic Coast, we got the Gulf Coast, and we got the Pacific Coast. I've been manifesting this for a year. We have the Coast Conference. Okay, we can make it happen. I'm just saying. I put a lot of time and effort into this. It could occur. So I think, so the Pac-12 was you expand or die, right? So we probably do need to add some teams. If it's not a whole lot of money, it's still better than no money. And that's really all this is about, is getting more money, right? Those are my thoughts on it. We can get into Notre Dame later, but what are your thoughts on possible expansion?
Aside from the, logistics for the athletes themselves, I'm intrigued by the Cal and Stanford thing, not entirely, I think it is interesting because the ACC sort of coming full circle. I mean, when the ACC first started, one of the notable factors was every school in the conference had some sort of respect or had some sort of reputation for respectable academics. I think that it's one thing to, add competitive non-revenue sports, but one way that ends up paying off is when you have championship caliber non-revenue sports, because that's, the NCAA is not good at much, but they are pretty good at putting on national tournaments. I think Ovius said that the other day. And, introducing Stanford women's basketball into the ecosystem of the ACC, and also vice versa, getting ACC exposure on the West Coast, like getting a foot in the door of the California market, opening recruiting in California to the entirety of the ACC, because you'll be across the country, but it's not a matter of, I'll never get to see my kid compete. They'll be there quite frequently, because if you add them to the conference, it's not like you're going to ignore them. So I don't necessarily write it off. And I also think that I realize that, the realities of the sport have absolutely no bearing on decision-making anymore, because everything's money-based. But, I would caution Clemson and Florida State fans, at least, that, regardless of whether or not they succeed in getting out of the ACC, if that's their intention, I think we've heard more rumblings from Florida State than we have Clemson, which doesn't surprise me really, because I've always, I'm not a Clemson fan either, but I've always sort of felt like there's a little bit more realism in Death Valley than there is in Tallahassee. But one of the things you have to ask yourself is, why has Clemson had such a sustained run of success in the ACC? And I think it might have something to do with the fact they're not facing Auburn-sized players every single weekend and week out. They're not having to run out there and, get through a game in the swamp, not just victorious, but healthy. One of the how many national championships would Alabama have won in the past decade alone, if not for injuries? And that's one of the things that I think that even if you succeed even if the dog catches the car, not many people are good at gaming out what happens after that. And I think all you need to do is look at Maryland to see how that works out. You go from being a perennial national power in basketball and when they left, they weren't the cream of the crop, but Maryland has known some, respectable success in football. And when's the last time you heard of Maryland football doing anything? And for that matter, when's the last time you've heard of Maryland basketball doing anything? And I think it's important for Florida State and Clemson fans to remember that they're not exactly setting the world on fire off the football field. And in Florida State's case, they're not exactly setting the world on fire on the football field. It's at least Clemson has the ability to argue that they've been in the college football playoff in the last couple rounds. Aside from a fluke play in Jordan-Hare Stadium that would have had Alabama playing Florida State instead of Auburn, Clemson's the only national champion out of the ACC in the past 30 years, 20 years. So I mean, college football fandom is like politics. It's everything's what have you done for me lately, and everyone wants to run to the most recent shiny new object. I think we do need to have a mind towards expanding. I would be cautious about SMU, not necessarily because of any overt, athletic concerns, more having to do with, I think Texas has probably been the most volatile state as far as conference realignment. And I think
restructuring, realignment, we can just bury that word. Reorganization, right, whatever you want to use, some sort of bankruptcy term. Let's use that.
Yeah. And I think, as rich as they are and as powerful as they are and as influential as they are, college presidents are human. And I think, a lot of the, rush to, jump off what you think is a sinking ship, only to realize that it's the sinking ship that you just jumped onto and where you were was fine. There's something to be said for the ACC hasn't had to deal with, Texas-based culture issues as far as their athletic director and college administrator meetings. The Big Ten as I'm not saying that Ohio is not a wild and wondrous place, but there's something to be said for not having to deal with the constant bickering and infighting and it's not an impropriety anymore, but the Pony Express caliber controversies that killed the SWAC, that have threatened to kill the Big 12, and that have drugged the SEC in. I mean, you see the documentary with Johnny Manziel and all that was going on there, and not to say that's not going on at every school, but there's just I'm not going to be upset if we stay out of the Texas morass, at least for the time being.
My only thing on SMU is at least it fits academically. The reputation fits academically with a lot of the ACC schools. And I think one of the things that we've talked about are the non-football sports. The proximity of a lot of the ACC schools to one another can alleviate a lot of the travel burdens.
Yeah.
It's very easy to go from Wake, North Carolina State, to Duke, to UNC, to Virginia Tech, and to Virginia. Yep. It's very, very easy to do.
All those schools you just named, for a Duke-based example, those were all bus rides. There were no flights in what you just named when I was in school.
Right, and all those schools have adapted to the pandemic, and they all have understood that you can make classes available online. And you know what? If you have a big road trip and everybody's out here for a little bit for the Olympic sports, you can make that work. I think we can make that happen pretty easily. I will say this mainly because I really don't like what Notre Dame is doing to our conference. And Mike Bray's not at Notre Dame anymore, so I can be a little bit more open about this. What if I imagine a world in which Notre Dame was not part of the conference, and we could have made a play to get BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, and we could have been real players early in the restructuring that occurred. And what if we picked up a school like maybe Utah or Oregon? Yeah. Not that I'm rooting for all these conferences to die, and I'm not saying that it's a either or choice, but I think all this kind of abusive relationship that we're in with Notre Dame is holding us back. And I know that we're getting money from it through the TV deal, but how many times do we have to get told no by Notre Dame before we just say this isn't going to happen?
Right. And I think, for fear of losing, I mean, it's not even like, the football team is quite literally not in the conference, and yet we're still crippled by this fear of them going somewhere else. But, if they were going to leave, if they were going to bolt for the Big Ten, we would have heard those inquiries already. I mean, I think one of the things that the ACC brass needs to get a better handle on is Notre Dame does not have a decided advantage in the power balance of that negotiation. And if anything, they might be at a disadvantage. It's if the ACC was to, let Notre Dame hear the Branch Creek, it's like and if I'm not as I've had to spend the past month reading up on bar exam prep as opposed to the grant of rights, so I'm not as familiar.
So tell me about riparian rights.
Oh God, can we talk about the rule against perpetuities instead?
Oh geez, God.
But that's like, and if there was ever a paper tiger in college athletics, not just football, Notre Dame can't even rise to the level of Stanford or probably even Cal off the football field. And depending on the week, as long as you're not running up against the likes of Marshall or 2016 Duke, it's no telling what you're going to get on the football field. That's the ACC at some point has to, I think we at some point have to say, you need us more than we need you.
Well, then here's the thing. Notre Dame is not going to join the ACC because they're one of the top 5 or 10. I don't know exactly where they fall, most viewed football teams per week. All right. So for football, they're like, we're fine. We can do whatever we want. We've got our own contract. We'll be good, whatever. But we kind of need you for these other teams, the non-revenue sports, right? So can you do us a solid? What are we getting from that? What are we getting from that? It is I guess you could say one-sided rivalry. I don't know, but it's definitely a one-way street. It's a one-way relationship. It is not helpful to the overall brand of the ACC. And if they didn't join us in 2020 when we had a lot of leverage to get them to join the conference, why would they join us now? They're going to get a new TV deal in 2025. No. And if they don't get one, then another conference can swoop in and grab them. I just don't see where, and especially if Notre Dame, if the reporting from Tigers Illustrated is true, which I have no reason to doubt that it is. I'm just noting that it's a crazy time, so a lot of stuff's going to get said. But I think that guy's right. If Notre Dame is trying to leverage us to accept Cal and Stanford, shouldn't we as a conference get something out of that from Notre Dame?
Right. And that's the other part of the consideration. And this is going to, again, because no one thinks of the, literal aspects of the sport and how it affects people's bottom line, because it doesn't affect it tomorrow. It affects it down the road. Notre Dame, what is like, if they were to leave the ACC tomorrow, thinking strictly from a football standpoint, what is their best case scenario alternative? Because on one hand, if they thought it was hard to schedule a competitive slate of teams before we had this mega conference restructuring, and it's all that we can do to get the SEC not to schedule 4 weeks of Southwest Alabama Tech, A&M State Incorporated. What is the incentive for the new members of the mega Big Ten or the SEC that's trying to take care of their own and preserve their regional autonomy and brand, or the Big 12 trying to reassert itself, to schedule Notre Dame? as opposed to, and the ACC is not God's gift to college football, but right now, if Notre Dame joined the ACC, it would raise the caliber of the league, and Notre Dame would consistently be at the top of the league. But if they left this situation, where else can they replicate that? I just don't. I don't see any other league as we stand today being as conducive to them as the ACC has been. And I don't see any other situation where if, hell froze over and they joined a league, entirely, where they would come out smelling as good as they would if they just, bit the bullet and joined the ACC.
No, they would be right up there with Clemson. And I think you'd have to say Florida State is probably at the number 2 level. And frankly, NC State's had some really good seasons of late. Yep. They had a lot of injuries last year. I voted for them in my top 25. I think Armstrong's going to do well, but NC State's been pretty good. UNC's been pretty good. I think Notre Dame would be a step above NC State and North Carolina. So to your point, it makes sense. And if they don't want to come do it, I mean, how many times do you have to get told no?
Right.
Before you move on to someone else? I mean, I was talking about it with my wife. I just said, it's like one of those movies from the 80s, where the guy was kind of creepily, now we would say and recognize it was creepily following after the girl. Back then you laughed about it. Right. We're kind of stalking Notre Dame, but Notre Dame is also abusing us to get back at us or some, I don't know. It's a toxic relationship. Right. And I think it either needs to we need to go ahead and get married, or we just need to separate.
Right. And that's the, I think you're spot on. And you made a good point there also. I mean, I don't think there's a coach in the country who would look at the prospect of having to come into Durham, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, the middle of the ACC, Blacksburg. Yeah. I don't know a coach in the country that would look forward to having to deal with all that, trying to be the caliber of program that Notre Dame thinks they can be. And and no disrespect to the 4 locations I just mentioned, but would you rather try to make it through, that part of the college football world, or would you rather that exact iteration be Happy Valley, the Big House, East Lansing, and Madison, Wisconsin? There's, at least when you come down here, it's not 7 degrees at kickoff, let alone there's a little bit of a, there's a little bit of a competitive difference in those 2 situations. So again, it just goes to show you that, there is nothing objective about what's driving the situation right now. And in Notre Dame's case, it's even worse because they have the standard lack of objectivity and the, completely unearned self-importance that they haven't warranted for 40 years.
Concur. And I will say, though, the Big Ten is soft. I will go ahead and put that on record. I think those teams are overrated. We saw it with basketball. Remember, the ACC was garbage, steaming pile of flaming garbage this year. But who got to the Final Four, Lee? Were there any Miami? They're not in the Big East. Are they in the ACC? Right.
If I remember correctly, the year before, with 50% of the Final Four was ACC teams.
I mean, but the Big Ten. The Big Ten's for real, right? Yeah. They're the best. They're the best. We have this. It's like Seinfeld. It's not a lie if you believe it. That's what it is with the Big Ten. And you know what? Come at me. The FSU fans came at me recently.
Oh, that was great.
I know. And I tried to explain, grant of right. Look at that. And just saying a miscellaneous clause, just saying, as you know, that all changes have to be in writing does not mean unanimous consent to let in a new team, because there's already provision that speaks to what happens with new teams. And you have bylaws. Okay. It says 3/4 from what I was able to find, online. I just, Big Ten people come at me, whatever you want. But
we think Florida man's bad enough in the wild, and just try him on Twitter and put him in garnet and gold. And that's a whole nother world.
Well, then they're going to say, well, we beat you all the time. And again, if you're punching down to Duke and you're FSU, maybe you have been down for a while. Just saying. Just saying.
One of the most frustrating games in my waking memory of Duke football, let alone my career. Golly, missing that Florida State.
All right, let's switch gears. All right, we could go on about this forever, as we should, because it's a good topic and it's worth talking about. But last season, Duke football, excellent, outstanding. We loved it. It was a lot of fun. But now we're on 2023. I want to get your thoughts on what you expect from the Blue Devils overall this season, what you see as strengths of the team, and what you're most looking forward to.
Absolutely. I don't think that it's one thing to be optimistic, and it's another thing to be optimistic and have specific things you can point to justify it. I don't, in living memory, I don't know that there's been a Duke football team that had this many green flags about it, including the Spurrier teams in the late 80s, because part of the reason they were so successful is because they came out of nowhere. I think that for the first time since at least 2017 or 18 with Daniel, if not way before, we know what we're getting on offense. I think we have done a good job of, I would say we've had a borderline masterful job of reassembling the offensive line in light of a lot of departures of grad transfers last year, or graduations of the grad transfers that played last year. I think that's going to be an immense strength. And I will say that, as goes the offensive line, so goes Duke football. I would venture to say
it's a hot take. The offensive line determines how well a team does. That's Colin Cowherd level right there.
The offensive line's low hanging fruit, but also people don't really appreciate the value of two good interior defensive linemen. I don't only say that because that's something that Duke has in spades this year, but that's the trenches dictate the game in ways that even the people that are versed in the cliches might not understand. God bless Colin Cowherd and his. If there's ever anyone that should lose Twitter privileges,
that's a whole other podcast. That what he said recently was reprehensible, and not apologizing for it is another problem. But anyway, continue.
I think, obviously Riley Leonard's the worst kept secret in the Atlantic Coast Conference. There's every reason to be excited, and he has, met the moment in every time that it has been presented to him. And I think also, a lot of people get frustrated when, certain other athletes throughout the conference, earned or not, get the spotlight. But I've always been of the opinion that, I would rather, as a player or a coach, be someone that, the spotlight is not on, but has a bona fide chance to snatch it at some point during the year, than someone who starts with it. Because, as certain teams who wear a different shade of blue and, have been known to start in the top 10 in the country and then not even make a bowl game, or almost not make a bowl game.
This interview, you're going to run for office, and someone's going to cut this clip and just play it on every radio station in the triangle.
Well, I might lose Orange County, but I'll make up for it in Wake County. The state fans will love it.
It's true.
But I think the most important factor for Riley this year is if he can stay healthy. I don't think that our bench would be a problem. I think we've got some good guys behind him. But I think, last year, Riley was a really good game manager. This year, Riley will be a difference maker. And I think that, Riley Leonard has the opportunity to carry this team. And I don't necessarily mean that on the basis of raw talent, because I think a lot of times you see guys come in with expectations and try to force things. His personality, his mindset on the field, his specific athletic skill set. I think he's pretty perfectly cut out to continue the trajectory that he's been on this year and whatever that means for the rest of the team, we're yet to see. But and as far as not to be dismissive, but we're going to have a pretty darn serviceable stable of running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers. I mean, we didn't lose wholesale really anybody from any of those positions last year. I think, look for Nicky Dalmolin to have a fantastic impact. I'm excited to see what Jalen Calhoun and Eli Pankel are able to put together. And I don't know that I would trade a 1-2 combo of Jordan Waters and Jalen Coleman for anyone else in the ACC. So I think Duke fans are going to see I'm not wanting to cast stones or aspersions or anything, but I think the sign of the offense taking the field will be a relief for the folks in Wallace Wade to the extent that it has not been in a long time. And I'm so excited to see what we're able to do with it, because I think Kevin Johns is one of those offensive minds that a lot of people who employ or lean heavily on the spread struggle with, mixing the phases of the game and effectively manipulating formations and allowing the quarterback the autonomy to make decisions at the line in a way that doesn't hamstring the overall scheme of the game. And I think, as we saw a few times last year, he doesn't have the classic spread offensive coordinator bug of not being able to milk the clock. We can get down the field, we can take our time, we can lean heavy on the run, we can spread people out. I mean, he's the type of guy that I think if tomorrow he had to go somewhere and be a defensive coordinator, he'd be fantastic, because he clearly understands not only his side of the ball, but how to scheme against the things we're going to see from opposing defenses. And as far as the defense, we've got a lot of reason to be optimistic, because, like I said, the defensive front is probably, and I know taken in the aggregate, people say all the time, I mean, the defensive front's what sets Clemson apart any given year. I mean, it's
P-line U, yeah,
exactly. But the single-minded effect that good interior defensive linemen have specifically, as far as dictating if the offense is able to establish the run, where it can go, shutting down the run, making offense one-dimensional, freeing up linebackers to go make athletic game-changing plays. Not only having Dwayne Carter back, but having Jamion Franklin back, it's hard to overstate how incredible that is for our outlook this year. And it's hard to overstate how valuable that is in breaking in not a new linebacker core, but a linebacker core that's used to being able to lean on Shaka Hayward. I think, round out that defensive line core with RJ Oben on one side and a rotation of really good, really athletic young people on the other. Our defensive front leaves very little to be desired this year, and having Aeneas Peoples to rotate in, it is even more incredible, because I can remember a time where Duke was struggling to have a person on the entire roster that broke 300 pounds. And now we've got, and now I don't know a coach in the ACC that wouldn't trade, their interior defensive line for ours. I think a big question will be whether or not Cam Dillon can be the guy. He definitely filled in masterfully a few times last year, and as a sort of 12th man at Mike, and as a really good complement to Shaka. Occasionally they put him in at will. I think that he's got a very high ceiling, and whether this year will be a great determination of whether or not that physical difference, if there is one, between his primary Ivy League background and a full exposure to a season-long regimen of Power 5 football. I have no doubt that he has the capability. I think it's just a matter of whether or not he can stay healthy and not get banged up, and be able to be at his at what full speed is for him on any given week. I'm excited to see Dorian Mausi injury free for the first time. I think we've got a lot of promise at linebacker, but I think we're going to have I'm aside from Clemson to start the year, I'm glad that we've got that stretch of Lafayette, Northwestern, and Connecticut to be able to get those guys a chance to really figure out their identity as a unit. We've got some good athletes in the defensive backfield, but again, we're young. That's one of the few places that we're going to have to, be demonstrative and get individual guys stepping up to sort of set the culture of the room. As you saw it at Duke in, the 2012, 2013 context, you can succeed with a group of young DBs, but it's got to be a confident group of young DBs. Breon Borders, DeAndre Singleton, and
well, that's a different breed. I mean, you don't always have guys like that.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people see age and get discouraged, but age ain't the whole ballgame. And I think these guys, if anything, are probably, as they stack up on paper, this will be one of the most athletic defensive backfields Duke's had in a long time. It'll just be a matter of whether or not they can, when the pads go on and the lights come on, that's when you make your money. And I'm personally very excited to see that we have decided to steer away from the 5'7" and under defensive back club.
Well, how tall was Devon Edwards? Because let me tell you, I would take any number of him.
That is true. I
mean, that guy, I'm just saying.
Devon knows I love him, and I completely echo your point there. I will say that throughout my time at Duke, I was always in a competition to not be the shortest guy on the roster. And the 1 year, at least, that Devon and I overlapped, I was definitely not the shortest guy on the roster.
Well, his ability, and I remember, so this is one thing that I've noticed. I've interviewed a lot of you former players, and you guys, to a man, do not like talking about individuals. Okay. Exception to that, Devon Edwards. Everybody who played with him. Yep. Carlos Ray, because I asked him, I said, how would he always be in the right place at the right? He said, that was just Devon. He just always knew how to be there. Jacoby Cofield, same thing. Said, you want to see the best player to play football who didn't make it to the NFL because of his knee injury? He said, that's Devon Edwards. I mean, we were having this conversation on Twitter today about how people who are not Duke football fans forget about how great he was. I mean, to go back to a Twitter exchange I had with Connor O'Neill, hey, that 2013 game against Carolina, but for Edwards, I'm not sure we win that game. I mean, he was that dynamic of a playmaker.
Yep. And, it's just, from my perspective, being on a college football, atmosphere it's a cool thing. Regardless of the school, regardless of the situation, it's just an objectively fascinating experience. But there are few things that I count myself, as fortunate as being able to be around Devon. And even in that season where, but for the first 3 or 4 games he was hurt, his attitude, his work ethic, it's secondhand humbling because, you're walking into the building next to arguably, one of the, top 5 greatest athletes to ever play football at Duke University. As far as humility, being a personable guy, quiet, you wouldn't know he was in the room if you didn't see him. He just unassuming, and everything fit into the aura. If you want to know who Daniel learned from as far as how to go about being a professional before you get to the professional level, I'd say it's because he got to learn from guys like Devon Edwards. And I joined the team a game or two into the 2016 season, and within a week or two, Devon knew my name. And that has nothing to do with me having any outstanding characteristics. I mean, that's just the type of guy he was. He was not the type of guy that was going to let anyone on the team feel like they did not have something to contribute. And I am one of the all-time best teammates to play with, independent of his just transcendent skill on the field.
No, he was something special. You hit a lot of key points that I want to follow up on. One of the things, though, you talked about the linebackers. When I did the ACC Weekly podcast with Matthew and Jeff, great guys, listen to their podcast. One of the things that I remember looking at was our linebacker core. Also, I was surprised how deep we were, how old we were. Teams like Duke need that to do well. But we're going up against Clemson week 1, and we have 2 linebackers. Dylan played great. I wish we still had Rocky Shelton. That's a whole other conversation we could have. After that, though, I'm a little concerned about it, and Clemson has 2 really good running backs. So you can exploit the 4-2-5 that we run by running the ball and by using a tight end. Okay, so that's going to be a challenge. Looking forward to seeing that game live. I do want to say, though, something you said about the 1989 team. I can text Randy Cuthbert right now. He may have some comments about that. I'm just saying, if you want me to do that, I'll reach out to him. He might have some words for you. Okay. Because part of what made that group special was Cuthbert was crazy. If you watch footage of him, I mean, I sent some of that around to some of the guys that I've interviewed, and they were like, man, if I had a guy like that on my team now, we would be in great shape. Okay. I'm just saying. Okay. Don't pick a fight with him. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
No, I'm that's why I got into Duke. I'm smart enough not to do things like that.
Okay. Here's one thing, though, that I want to get your thoughts on. About, you said this about Kevin Johns. One of the things that I hated during your time at Duke was that we ran a hurry up and the defense was gassed fast. Johns also runs a hurry up, but he gets to the line and then he waits 20 seconds before he snaps the ball. I think that will help keep us in games, particularly, which is a very brutal schedule this year, which we're going to go through in a minute. Could you talk a little bit about that from your perspective, about just getting those extra seconds to give the defense to rest up and strategize?
Yeah. And, that's one of those things in football that it sounds rudimentary, but it's a lot harder to successfully execute. And it's really extremely underappreciated as far as its value. I mean, you see guys, I think it was sort of the Chip Kelly school of coaching. I mean, you see that generation of coaches like, the Larry Fedoras and the guy that was at Baylor. I can't remember his name, but that's the son, Kendall. That spread, high up tempo. I think the ultimate example of it was it was a TCU and Baylor actually. Back in maybe 12 or 13, one of the two, high powered spread offenses, two of the highest scoring teams in the country, maybe even in the history of college football, and God forbid it rained. And I've never really understood the merit behind, let alone controlling the pace of the game even in the best conditions possible. I don't understand the merit behind a system where if something as simple as a little bit of rain can throw you off, how robust are you in your execution? And that's the thing. I mean, I think a great example in Duke's context, and which makes it even more ironic that we struggled with this more often than we didn't, but look at 2016 against Lamar Jackson. Not to take anything away from us, but
when the punter got hurt, oh my God.
Right. I mean, due to injuries and youth, when Austin got hurt, we had no business being in that game. But as far as, Coach Cutcliffe would call it the blend, meshing, it's combined arms warfare, meshing ground, air, and recon. It's not only it factors into the sort of next level of the game where it's you from Duke's perspective, trying to pull off an upset, like say against Clemson this year. If it's deemed that they have a high-powered offense, then the best way we can help our defense is by keeping them off the field. That is, not only the cliche of taking time on the play clock before you run the play, that's having the attention span and the players not getting restless, and probably more importantly, the coaches not getting restless and doing something stupid. And really leaning into, not to, parrot a talking point from the enemy, but it's running the four corners offense in football. And people make fun of the 3 yards in a cloud of dust, Woody Hayes approach, but he won a lot of football games. And that's the thing in the spread universe, that it's possible, but a lot of guys, especially in this era of coaching, didn't come up with that same exposure to both sides of the ball that some of the older coaches did. And as you look at guys that don't really understand, like you said, you run a hurry up offense and it makes the defense tired, but it also makes your offense tired. I mean, it also means that you can't change personnel based off of what the defense is showing you. Insert compounding issues as you go. And the going to no huddle but with a pause, it is dually effective, because you can conceivably run a hurry up offense from that, but also when you need to, and you're not giving the defense a visual cue that you have time to rest by getting into a huddle and just calling plays from the line, but still doing it in a concerted manner, you can control the game. And that's one of those frustrating things about college football, that how many guys get paid how many millions of dollars to not be able to figure out something that simple.
Running the ball and throwing to the tight end has worked for a long time, and there's no reason not to keep doing it.
Yep. And that's the thing, it's not only executing it, it's understanding the importance of execution on each guy in the operation. Because if you're in a ball control game plan, you miss one block that could throw off the entire projection for the half. And that's the other thing. In the anatomy of successfully pulling off an upset, one of the I think it was Joe Walsh or Gibbs, one of the two, but one of them had a like wrote out basically maxims for
Walsh wrote a book that you almost cannot find about how to run a whole football organization.
Right. And
if you find that, I will go in on it with you, because I read a collection of interviews that he did, which was tremendous. Yep. So if you find that book, call me. We will buy it together.
I'll do it. I'll hold you to it. But in that approach, one of the things that he talks about is, if you're going to successfully pull off an upset, it is imperative that you end every drive with a kick. Whether or not that's a kickoff after a touchdown, whether you get a field goal, whether you get a punt and flip the field and put your defense in a favorable position. The way that you lose games isn't, a lack of comparative athleticism. It's not, making mistakes. It's not, making smaller mistakes. It's making those catastrophic mistakes, like a turnover or a, fourth and short that objectively you should have kicked, but instead you decided to go for it and play into the, whatever. It's this whole myriad of factors, aside from, the Madden expertise that we all think we have as far as putting a real life game plan together, that you not only have to have the attention span and commitment as the coach to, stay true to this approach, you also have to have the maturity to say, it's a key point in the game. The crowd's behind us. It would make a lot of sense for us to go for it right here. But by God, if we don't get it, it's going to be bad. And like, you have to, have that, it's not, any lack of bravery or cowardice or anything. It's, not missing the forest for the trees. And I think that's something that last year, Coach Johns just exhibited a masterful ability to pull off. And again, I think it goes back to, when you're in the coaches meeting, you're playing ball under a defensive minded head coach. And that's, the best coaches are the guys. Offensive coaches can have, quick, flashy success, but you look at the coaches that have the most sustained success in college football or the NFL. Bill Belichick, defensive coach. Mike Tomlin, defensive coach. Nick Saban, defensive coach. I mean, you look at guys like Dabo, good coach, good program, inherited a lot, but has not had that same sustained Saban level success because his understanding of the game, you can see it as it plays out on the field, is not as multifaceted.
Okay. I'm just going to say, guys, I'm from the Clemson area. Go after Lee here. You guys have won a couple of national titles. A down year for you was 10 years. I am not dogging Clemson on this program. Okay. Just so we're clear, I am not dogging Clemson.
I'm not dogging them either. I just think that there's, better ways to motivate your team than telling them to bring their own guts.
Okay. And I think John's
go Tigers.
I think I'm going to be back down that way soon. I think I'm going to go visit some family. So I will give you Lee Rodio's cell phone number if you guys want to come after anybody.
Hope I didn't just get your tires slashed.
Well, yeah, we're going to be I will tell you, I went back to Central, and it is not, which is I guess you could call it a suburb of Clemson. I don't know what you call it, but it is not the same area I grew up in, man. There was a coffee shop there. The Ingles looked fantastic. If you've ever been to an Ingles grocery store, I mean, oh yeah. Weird to learn that Ingles is just Spanish for English, but anyway, that's a whole other thing, because they were always proud of being an American-owned company when I was growing up. But now I'm just like, okay, well, really kind of a Spanish-named company, but whatever. Anyway, so just it's a different place, but everybody there is a big Clemson fan. So Lee is trying to get me killed. That's what we've learned today.
Well, to save your neck and to spare myself some nasty letters and podcast reviews, I will retool that example and say, example of an successful offensive coach, Jimbo Fisher. Sustained spurts of success.
I mean, he's getting paid $9 million to stink. I guess you could say that.
Right. That Jimbo Fisher, Chip Kelly, like flashy, a lot of points kind of approach. But, when did Georgia make it to the next level? When they got the defensive minded guy that could see the 30,000 foot view of how everything's supposed to fit together. And that's how you win national championships with a quarterback like Stetson Bennett. That's why Lincoln Riley, as good in mind as he is just not ever gonna. I mean, how many times do we have to get to that level for him to demonstrate that he doesn't see the game in the way that you need to see it to be able to make sure that you're not completely, negating one side of the ball.
I will say Lee has written off large parts of this is not an ask me anything on Reddit. All right. This is okay. But I will say that year Clemson was down and they had 10 wins. They played Georgia probably better than anybody else.
Right.
And so I will say, whatever people who are complaining about Clemson, I would love to have a down year and have 10 wins. I mean, I will say there's some stuff, Dabo probably needs to tweak. It looks like he's doing that, but God knows what he's doing. And so let's just use that as a segue. Let me get your thoughts on the win-loss record. I'm gonna rattle off the games. I'll be at the Clemson game, folks. Come hit us up. Haven't got the tickets yet, but I think I'm gonna be in 23, maybe somewhere around there. I'm not sure. I may be thinking of the NC State game that we got tickets for. No, I'm thinking of the NC State game that we got tickets for. That's 23. Haven't gotten stuff for where I'm going to be for Clemson yet, I don't think. But come see us. We'll be there. All right. So let's go through the schedule. All right.
All right.
Clemson.
All right, no one's going to believe me that I'm, being anything other than a homer and a, alumni, not trying to get written out of the former players email chain, but for unironic and realistic reasons, I think Duke can pull this out. I think you look at our, put strength to strength. I think if Clemson succeeds to their standard this year, I think they will succeed because of their defense. And I think if Duke achieves the heights that we have in our ability to achieve this year, it'll be because of our offense. And I think to narrow it down even more, it's going to come down to our offensive front against their defensive front. And, we've got an offensive front anchored by guys like Jacob Monk and Graham Barton, who've spent, 4, 5, and 6 years on the field, getting experience, getting repetition, and guys who expect to play on Sundays next year. You couple that with, Cade Klubnik had his coming out party in the ACC championship last year. But I think that had the effects of him coming into the game had a little bit more to do with DJ Uyunglele and what he left to be desired, as opposed to what Klubnik brought to the table. Not to say that, their offense is ineffectual or anything like that. I just think that, it would be irresponsible to not be realistic about the fact that they're going to come into an environment with a highly motivated, Duke team with a guy that's not particularly tested, and against a Tennessee team that had phoned it in last year. I mean, Tennessee had, missed their mark and were, hobbled by injuries, and Clemson didn't put up a bad effort, but, they're not the, there's reason to think that they are not the juggernaut that they, expect from their program. And I think if you ask me if this was the last game of the year, my answer would probably be different. But I think the dynamics of that first game, and, Dabo Sweeney's Clemson teams are notorious for not starting particularly fast. I think when you combine age, matchups, environment, extraneous circumstances, I will realistically say, and cap it off with, I think we've got superior special teams personnel. I see Duke winning this game.
All right. I like that. I like the confidence. I like the confidence. I did read the Pick Six previews, which I ordered. I think it's if you want to get the digital copy, I think it's $20. It's a good investment. Expect a little bit more running than we saw last year from Clemson, and that could pose some issues for us. We'll see. I like your confidence. I like where you're going. I'm excited. All right, Lafayette.
I don't think it's going to warrant as much of a explanation there. Go ahead and say a win.
All right. The only issue there, I think that's a short turnaround, but I still think that Duke's going to win that game. I was surprised how short of a turnaround there's going to be, but I think Duke wins that game, and I'm excited about it. I'm not trying to disrespect the Blue Devils by saying that. I was just surprised at how short of a turnaround they have going from Clemson to Lafayette. It's kind of like when you guys used to play the academy teams. Yep. You'd play Navy or Army and you'd want a bye week. Okay. That kind of surprised me. Northwestern, I don't think we're going to disagree there, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a win. I think, and I will dare say that will be a more satisfying win than wins against that team have been in the past.
Nice to have Jay Lou back too.
It is. You talk about a great teammate and just all around good guy. I was so excited to see him back.
When I saw the stuff start coming down about that, I messaged the Duke football talk guys, and I said, I think this might make me a bad person, but the only thing I can think about right now is the fact that we probably might get Jay Lou back. And sure enough, it happened. Probably does make me a bad person. Anyway, UConn, who do you got?
Even if it does, you're not as bad a person as Pat Fitzgerald. Being realistic, I think that has all the makings of a trap game. I think that, New England football specifically between UMass and Connecticut, they're in sort of a make or break era as far as, the outlooks of their programs. We think we in the ACC are on sketchy footing as far as our alignment and relegation, everything. And I think those guys are, playing for, not only are they playing for the future of their programs, they're playing for, respect and, for pretty purely playing for each other. And I think that's a dangerous combination. I will say, I think Duke has gotten to the point, if you see the guys in person, the new kids, even the guys that have been in the program for a long time, Duke has reached a physical level of competitiveness that I think sets us apart from even where we were last year. And so I will say Duke will win that game, but I think it'll be closer than we want it to be.
I do think Mora is a pretty good coach too. He knows what he's doing, and we will have to see how that plays out. So just keep that in mind going forward. But let's go to the next game. We have Notre Dame. Who do you got in that one?
Well, with many apologies to my one of my closest friend, former teachers from my K-12 years, Gordon Galloway, who is the extremely successful head coach of the Cardinal Gibbons lacrosse program in Raleigh, coming off, I think, their second state championship in a row. Diehard Notre Dame fan, and actually local non-Duke affiliated, but Duke football fan guy who wanted to see some college football and bought season tickets and has sort of fallen in love with it. If he listens to this, he's not going to be happy with me, but I do think that we sneak up on Notre Dame in that one, and I think a lot of it's going to have to do with how healthy we come through the Clemson game, but especially if we, no matter, regardless how I make it through the Clemson, if we can stay healthy and have a respectable showing, I think we've got a perfect run up as far as caliber of competition leading into Notre Dame. I think I'm not taking anything away from Lafayette, but I think having a physical mismatch that week, then working our way back up to Northwestern, which is a lot more parity and a lot more they're the regionalization of college football. You see a lot more physical similarities between Northwestern and the Notre Dames of the world. And then, being able to, have the test of, I think UConn will be a mental test more than anything. And Notre Dame will be coming off Ohio State, if I'm not mistaken, won't they?
Let me pull up their schedule real quick and check.
They're either coming off of Ohio State or they've got them the week after, one of the two.
All right. So they have, there's nothing quite like having to fill time during the podcast. Yes, they have Ohio State beforehand, then they play Duke, then they play Louisville.
Crazier things have happened than a good athletic team slipping up the week after a gigantic game.
You hate to see it, but more than that, you love to see it.
I'm going to go ahead and say now, I'm not picking Duke to go undefeated. I'm not, that much of a unrealistic homer kind of guy, but I do think, partly because I think that, some of the turmoil in their coaching ranks, I think that they are expecting an unfair return on investment from Marcus Freeman. I actually really like him. I think he's a great coach, but I think that he's in a situation not unique to Notre Dame, but maybe especially caustic there. They want him to walk on water, no pun intended. And I've only ever heard tell of one person that could do that. So I unironically think Duke will beat Notre Dame.
Got us at 5-0. Then we're going into a big game coming up. That's the bye week.
Look, there's a time in my life where we couldn't even take that one for granted.
Right. So Steve Weissman and Steve's going to come back on. Great guy. I think very highly of Steve. We're going to do a little recap on where Duke is at that point. Look forward to that one. Then we've got North Carolina State, Florida State. I'm going to be at the North Carolina State game. My law partner, Devin, needs to go ahead and order the tickets to FSU. I know you're listening to this. You haven't done it yet. Please do it. Then we got Louisville and Wake Forest. Walk us through those next 4 games.
This looking over the schedule and sort of comparing, each team's situation and matchups before we got on, I think this 4-game stretch is, nearly impossible to prognosticate. I mean, it is. I will go so far as to say I can see Duke coming out of this 3-1, but as far as how that plays, I mean, I could see us coming out of it 0-4. But as far as how any of it plays out, I think, the circumstances of the season, injuries, the circumstances of how any particular close game is won or lost. I could realistically see us beating State, because I think that they're one of those teams that has an incredibly high ceiling, but they've got some really big question marks. And I really, you sort of need to see how their projections play out as the year develops. I'm, as much as it pains me to say, I don't think this is the year that we finally break our streak against Florida State. I think that I believe the hype around them this year. I think that they finally have, the Jimmys and Joes to put forward a product on the field that their fan base, is used to or accustomed to seeing, or, think they are because that's what their parents told them it was like to go to Florida State games when they were born. Florida State's the real deal this year. And I think that, that 1-2 punch will be tough. The ball bounces a different way two or three times. I could see us going 0-2. I think we'll probably split that. I see us beating State and losing to Florida State.
Wow. All right. So you've got a 6-1 going against Louisville.
Yep. And that next one is, as far as the extraneous factors, environment, athletic disparity, I think it's not as stark, but then you start to add trap game mentality. You start to add, Louisville's going to, depending on how their season plays out, they're either going to be, playing out of their minds, trying to, save their establishment over there, or, they may have phoned it in by then. I think we beat Wake, and I think Louisville is an incredible toss-up of a game because a lot of, not entirely unrelated to the fact that a lot of people I highly respect, that, have been doing this for a lot longer than I've ever, given it thought, see Louisville as a really good chance to be a dark horse team this year.
And we're playing them late, which is the problem.
Exactly. So bearing in mind that one could go any different way, I will not be the Jay Billis type of Duke grad, and I'll err on the side of Duke, but I will say realistically that one I could see us very easily losing.
So you're going after everybody. Jay Billis isn't safe. I met Jay once. Nice enough guy, but that was a long time ago, and we can save that for later.
And I say that not even to say that being realistic is a bad thing, because I think part of what makes him such a talent at his job is he doesn't give credit where credit isn't due, and I think that it means more when he expresses confidence in a team, because he's not going to blow smoke. But then again, he does that for a living, and I'm just some surly law school graduate who gets to wax poetic about the heights of Duke football. So
right. Well, all right. Well, so we've got 3 games left, one against Chapel Hill College, one against UVA, and one against Pitt. I think the middle game there is a Duke win. I can't expect anything from UVA. You are nodding your agreement with that. Carolina. Yeah. I mean, Carolina and Pitt, what do you think about those 2 games?
I'll get my alma materism out of the way first. we're going to beat Carolina because we've beaten Carolina how many times in the past decade, and everyone agreed but the refs.
Certainly last year.
There will be no shortage of motivation on in Duke's locker room, and I have a hard time knowing the culture that Mac Brown has crafted, and no fault to him. I really mean it. I mean, it's the world we live in, and one of his strengths as a coach is that he's adaptable. And knowing the culture that he's created, there are a lot of guys in that locker room who will not be in Chapel Hill next year, who maybe this is their first year in Chapel Hill. There's a lot of good athletes, but I don't understand the hype. I mean, you look at Lamar Jackson at Louisville the year after they were competitive. I mean, he sort of stayed on, his Heisman year, and then he had a year after that. I mean, he was the only attraction, and you're going to win some games that way just because you got a superior athlete. And Drake May is a phenomenal football player. He's one of the best people I've ever seen play the game in person. But, he can't make tackles and kick field goals, both of which Carolina has struggled to do notably in the past few years. So with every bit of pride in my alma mater and my shade of blue, and with every bit of contempt that the Chapel Hill football program deserves, and even some that they probably don't deserve, I will gladly say that we will beat them in Kenan Stadium with its ugly additions and terrible soundtracks, and fake field. I mean, honestly, the program's so fake, even the grass ain't real. What else can you say?
Wow. All right. Lee is going to Cancelvania after today.
I mean, shoot. I mean, I'm going to lean into it while we're here. You get Mac Brown back. You get a national championship winning head coach. And what's the first thing you do? You reduce your stadium capacity by 15,000 seats and then start bragging about how well you sell out games. Well, I'll be darned. If Duke could reduce our stadium capacity to 250 seats, we'd sell out every game except for maybe a few. I mean, it's just
you've got your own Lee Rodio level of Cancelvania now. That's where you are. That is where you are. Okay. So okay, Pitt. I've said this before. Josh Cox, you have an in with Jesus. Why can't we beat Pitt? Make it happen, Josh. Josh, this is on you. If we don't beat Pitt this year, I'm calling out Josh right now. This is on Josh.
Yeah, wow. Okay. That's
I'm just saying he has an in, right? Actually, I have my wallet here. But it's a different thing. I got ordained as a priest, as a minister in the Church of the Latter-day Dude, which is inspired by the movie The Big Lebowski.
Yep.
So I'm also a religious figure. It's just that's not really our thing. So that doesn't really count to the same extent Josh has an in.
I'm not going to say that has anything to do with the amount of times that the Lord's name was taken in vain on the sideline against Pitt in 2019, but I'm not going to say that's not the reason either.
Just saying we should have gone for one last year. I know everybody thinks I'm an idiot for it. Go for one. Just go for one.
Yep. And that's ties back into that level of coaching. It's not only, where does this put me in the moment? It's a matter of, if I do this, what sense of urgency will this inspire in my opponent? And that's just, it's an entirely neglected approach to the game. But unfortunately, I think you're right. And I think this isn't the year that we finally break the curse. Pitt is not going to be as good as they have been. But one of the drawbacks of the 4-2-5 is that, you by nature struggle when you play against a team that puts their hand in the dirt and runs straight at you. And, like them or hate them. And I think less of Pat Narduzzi than I do of Mac Brown. That's their thing. That's their game. They're a Big Ten school in ACC uniform, and it's worked for them. And I don't think this is the year that changes.
They're not soft though, like the Big Ten. So I'm getting canceled now too. We're both in Cancelvania at this point.
Yeah, no, I probably have less reservation talking about Pitt than I do Carolina. I mean, just starting fights before games and coaches egging them on, and just, I always thought it was ironic when Pat Narduzzi very rightfully got in trouble for using the word thug to describe how he thought his players looked, because that was always the word I would use to describe Pat Narduzzi. So
spitting the heat. I love it. I love it, man. I love it.
Just listens. That's I'm trying to play to the algorithm.
I love it. I'm just gonna hashtag a lot of stuff here. And we'll see. You've got them going 10-2. So I think you have them playing for the ACC championship this year.
Yeah,
Blue Devils.
Yeah, it would depend, I think, on Clemson circumstances. And I will say I sort of tried to game it out, and I think there are not very many definites. There are more good feeling sort of games, but I think that I will go so far as to say we won't miss a bowl game, but I think we could realistically go everywhere from 7-5 to 10-2.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, because this is a brutal schedule, the likes of which we've not seen in a long time. And this is a very old, very talented, very deep team who believes in one another. And that's a good thing to have. And I do hope, though, that we do end 10-2. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. It's going to be tough. It's hard for a school like Duke, but I think it'd be great. And if this is a winning season with this schedule, this could be one of the best seasons in Duke football history.
Yep. So I see this season having the same effect on this program that the 2012 Carolina game did. That it was so prophetic that it came down to one, Jamison Crowder of all people catch. But the effect that game had on Duke football, and demonstrating not only to the people in the locker room, but the people around the world, that this sort of caliber of football is possible in Durham. I see this season as having a great chance of having that same effect.
Could well be. Lee, you have been on this for a while, where we've gotten you canceled multiple times over. I love the hot takes. I think it's fantastic. I'm very excited to put this interview together and get it posted. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about? You've been on here before, you get an open mic. So if there's anything else you want to discuss, the floor is yours.
I've made you listen to me ramble for quite a bit today, so I won't prolong it anymore. But I will say, happy birthday to former Duke strength coach Noel Durfee, one of the best people in the entire business. All around great human being, great family. I love them all to death. And I will go so far as to say, and I think a lot of people would back me up on this, if there was one person that Duke's successes in the 2010 decade could be credited to, it would be Noel Durfee, as far as getting guys physically ready, as far as getting guys in the right mental state of mind to go out and be successful, as far as building young men in the way that Duke expects of our student athletes to be, and as far as being the emotional linchpin that held the entire organization together. Noel Durfee is second to none. And I think in the way that the 2001 season ended, a lot of people didn't get their roses that they were due. I want to make sure that does not happen for Coach Durfee. So happy birthday to him, and thanks to him for everything that he did for Duke football.
Hey guys, sorry for not announcing this during the interview itself. We ran out of time, but I've just found out that there is a guy associated with the UNC program, football, apparently somewhat high up, who is a big fan of the podcast, and there's some talk that he may want to come on. Again, a little uncertain, trying to get all the details. I'll look into it and see if it works out. Maybe something big happens. And again, sorry for not announcing this during the interview itself, but we just ran out of time. Well, thank you, Lee. That was a great message, great way to end. And guys, look, this is going to be a little bit of a different season. We're going to do it in season instead of doing the game previews and recaps in written form. I've been lining up a bunch of interviews with a lot of beat writers, bloggers, people who follow our opponents. So we're going to do a whole lot of get to know your opponents. Follow us, subscribe, listen, just follow us on Twitter. You know where to find us. You know where we are. We are everywhere you get your podcast. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Spoutable. You can find us on Reddit. You can find us anywhere almost that there is social media, we are there. Hit us up at Duke FB Coverage. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. And as always, go Duke.